Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys, let's learn, shall we? Hannibal's new offensive in southern Italy, preemptive like the longer video, so let's get right into it. Ready to learn? Battle of Cannae, I remember, was an insane battle. Battle of Tarentum, 212 BC.
Carthaginian general Hannibal, the victor of Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae, consolidated his position in southern Italy. His army defeated all that Rome had thrown at it. But years of campaigning and lack of support from Carthage had exhausted even his grizzled veterans. Many had been with him for the past 7 years, pacifying the tribes of Iberia, marching through Gaul, and crossing the Alps to bring war into Italy. Yet Rome proved itself an enemy who did not know when he was beaten. Fabius Maximus had blunted Hannibal's lightning campaign and had rebuilt Rome's shattered armies. Recruiting another 6 legions in January, the consul now had 18 legions at his disposal. Nearly 200,000 troops across all theaters of war. The resolve of the Romans was unquestionable. On paper, Hannibal could not match the might of his foe, with only 60,000 men. But despite inferior numbers, he had outfoxed the Romans many times before. If there was one man who understood that in a game of chess, a well-placed pawn can be more powerful than a king, it was Hannibal. In his winter quarters near Arpi, Hannibal prepared to use Apulia as the staging ground for the campaign of 214 BC. But no sooner had the snow melted than a messenger arrived from Capua. The Capuans dreaded the fresh build-up of Roman forces around Campania, knowing that it was their defection that Rome resented the most. They requested Hannibal's aid. Owing to the urgency of the message, Hannibal scrapped whatever plans he may have had in Apulia and sent word to Hanno in Bruttium to march north and meet him in Campania.
It's interesting that you could get so much sympathy, sympathy against Rome. I mean, Rome has been established for centuries now, right? As a power, and to still have populations there that aren't, you know, just like in countries today where you have kind of some separatist groups and not everyone gets along. The Kurds come to mind, and then obviously like stuff going on in Sudan and whatnot. That the same thing would exist back in these times, obviously. But I know so little about the different movements within Rome that this would be really interesting to learn about. Pretty niche.
On his way back towards the Apennine Mountains, Hannibal brazenly marched his troops within a stone's throw of the Roman camp at Luceria. The two armies could almost make eye contact. One eager Roman centurion turned to his men, as if about to give the signal to charge. If there was ever a time to attack Hannibal, it was now, while his army was vulnerable in marching formation. But Gracchus was apprehensive. That Hannibal had the gall to pass so close to the Roman camp surely meant that he was baiting them into a trap, or so Gracchus thought. Little did he know that this was exactly what Hannibal wanted him to think.
A double trap?
In his haste to come to Capua's aid, the cunning Carthaginian general took a calculated risk. He knew that exposing himself to attack would be seen as a provocation and would in turn pin Gracchus in place for fear of an ambush. Still, despite the Roman general's suspicions,
that is some chess versus checkers, and it's a great chess checkers analogy of knowing that they're going to think it's a trap, when it is a trap in a sense, but it's like a double trap. Does that make sense?
There was no trap. But by the time he realized this, the chance to wrong-foot Hannibal had gone. This paralyzing paranoia that Hannibal instilled in the Roman leadership was unheard of, and perhaps
The confidence that you have to pull off something like that is crazy.
Perhaps not repeated by any other enemy of Rome throughout its history. And now he was on his way back to Capua. In our modern society, communication has become easier than ever, but in relationships, we still face the same anxieties and tough questions. Why do I keep dating the same type of toxic person? Why do I feel like I'm not good enough? Should I be worried they're still friends with their ex? Ironically, social media platforms can sometimes make things even more complicated. Relationships aren't easy, but you're not alone. So stop asking the tough questions into the void. My sponsor BetterHelp will connect you with a therapist who can help you find answers to some of these questions. Instead of being stuck in an endless loop of questioning yourself, you can talk through relationship concerns with someone who's trained to help you find real answers.
I think BetterHelp is a great idea. The concept of BetterHelp, I don't know much about it, but I've had therapy before, and although I'm not sure how far therapy can go, there is an initial giant benefit, even if the person isn't extremely qualified. Not to say that they aren't on BetterHelp, I'm sure they are. But just talking to someone who its job is there to listen to you and isn't going to talk to others really is therapeutic. Even if you don't get, the best answers back, so.
Fill out a questionnaire and you will match with a therapist in as little as a couple days. Easily switch therapists anytime at no extra cost if it's not the right fit. They carefully make sure therapists on the platform are well qualified, and their customer support team is there to help you if you have any questions. Going to therapy is a sign of strength, not weakness. There are so many kinds of relationships that can be improved by therapy, not just romantic ones. Click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/historymarsh and get 10% off your first month of therapy.
As always, guys, make sure if you learn about BetterHelp from watching this with me, and it's their video, make sure to use the promo codes and links from History March and original link top of the description, and then you'll see there. Let's go.
Trailed by Gracchus, Hannibal pillaged the lands of Benevento, seeking to provoke his enemy into a fight. Gracchus, however, was under strict orders not to advance beyond Benevento, thus allowing the Carthaginian army to slip away. At this time, the Roman leadership faced a most bizarre crisis: bad omens. Witnesses saw a woman turn into a man. A crow built a nest inside a temple. A tree lit itself on fire. Animals spoke in human tongue.
Okay, a few of these I feel like can be pretty normal things, like a crow nesting in a temple, a tree catching on fire, maybe lightning or something. But the cow, animals speaking, and a man into a woman or a woman into a man, those, I don't really have an explanation for those.
Widespread sightings like...
Amongst the Marrucini, an infant had cried, "Lo triomphe," in its mother's womb. Come on.
These paralyzed the state. In the minds of the superstitious Romans, the gods were not happy, which could have dire consequences, especially in times of war. Senate proceedings were halted for several weeks so that elaborate rituals could be performed. Once diviners and soothsayers were consulted and the so-called peace of the gods was secured, did matters turn to dealing with the mortal men Rome feared the most. But upon reaching Campania, Hannibal quickly found that the situation was not as urgent as the Capuans had previously reported. Roman presence had increased, it was true, but the Carthaginian general had already prepared for this before leaving Campania at the end of 215 BC. He doubled the garrisons across the region. Fortifications were strengthened. Provisions were stockpiled to last a year. Thus, despite the reports, his presence in Campania was not required. Recalling him from Apulia was a major blunder by the Capuans. Romans, for it ruined whatever plans he may have had for the year 214 BC. Making matters worse, Quintus Fabius, the son of Fabius Maximus, used Hannibal's absence in Apulia to capture the cities of Aegae and Asculum. Making do, Hannibal besieged.
It's like you're doing something really important, extremely important, and then someone says, like, hey, I need you right now. It's like, all right, I'm in the middle of something. You need me there? Yeah, we need you. And then you get there. It's like, all right, I left my thing. What's up? We're actually all good now. Excuse me?
Fabius Maximus used Hannibal's absence in Apulia to capture the cities of Aegae and Asculum. Making do, Hannibal besieged the city of Puteoli and plundered the countryside, trying to secure a port closer to his base at Capua. And it was here that he had a most unexpected visit. 5 nobles from Tarentum, a Greek city in southern Italy, had come to meet Hannibal. These men were among many who previously fought for Rome, but were captured by the Carthaginians, some at Trasimene, others at Cannae. But because they were non-Romans, Hannibal treated them fairly and released them to their homes, declaring he came to Italy only to fight Rome. This courtesy paid dividend. It was these Greeks who now believed that they would enjoy greater autonomy if they sided with Carthage. They despised Rome's heavy-handedness and saw their chance to regain their long-lost influence. You see, in its heyday, Tarentum was a major regional power in southern Italy and a leading force in Magna Graecia, its prosperity renowned throughout the ancient world. The city had the best harbor in southeastern Italy and a large, fertile hinterland. But the withdrawal of King Pyrrhus and the subsequent Roman conquest of his allies marked the end of Tarentine hegemony in southern Italy.
Okay, so it actually hadn't been that long that Rome had secured the entire peninsula fully. So, all right.
Marked the end of Tarentine hegemony in southern Italy. The city was forced to accept an unequal alliance with Rome, which forced them to support Roman foreign policy, to receive a Roman garrison in its citadel, contribute ships and troops to Rome when it went to war, and pay an annual tribute. Now, more than 50 years later, these harsh economic and military burdens placed on Tarentum and its inexorable assimilation into the Roman domination.
An annual tribute, essentially, a tax. I mean, annual tribute, tax, same thing, right? All right, guys, continue.
Based on Tarentum and its inexorable assimilation into the Roman-dominated economic system was still the source of irritation for many Tarentines. At the meeting, the 5 nobles declared a pro-Carthaginian faction was forming in the city. If Hannibal's standard appeared in front of Tarentum, the gates would open. Hannibal welcomed their sentiment and bade them farewell. Soon he will be with them, he said. Meanwhile, Fabius Maximus and Marcellus were again elected consuls.
Oh, I have hiccups now. Another Greek-dominated zone kind of far away from Greece. Interesting.
At present, their biggest concern was the alliance between...
I believe. I'm 80% sure.
Between Hannibal and Hieronymus. The Syracusan fleet, joined by the Carthaginian navy, could potentially dominate the seas around Sicily, provide troops and supplies to Hannibal, and help him lock down southern Italy out of Rome's grasp. If this were to happen, Macedon would be further enticed into joining Hannibal, providing yet more men and material. The 2 consuls took this threat so seriously that they outfitted a new fleet, bringing the Roman navy up to around 150 vessels of war, mostly stationed in Bruttium and Sicily. And for the first time in Rome's history, the ships were manned by professional seamen. Keeping the Sicilian fleet active at all times was of such importance that the Senate mandated the salaries of the sailors be funded by the wealthy elite, ensuring payments would be on time to avoid any chance of mutiny. On land, the size of the Roman army...
I wonder if it's because of their inability to tax quickly enough the whole population, and I'm sure some sort of tax bracket existed, I'm sure. But instead, either they didn't have the ability to raise it fast enough conventionally in taxes, or they just went at a principle and just said, hey, the rich guys, like, you're paying. I wonder if it's like, okay, you guys are paying for this, or it's like, hey, we need help. We need you to pay for this. You know the difference? I'm trying to think about.
Over the Carthaginians on time to avoid any chance of mutiny. On land, the size of the Roman army towered over the Carthaginians. But Hannibal still inspired fear, and on his way to Tarentum, he stopped at Nola for a third time. Advancing on the city, Hannibal put more pressure on the Roman flanks to get access to the gates while holding in the center. But this time, as the battle commenced, Marcellus kept his men back. Looking past the chaos of battle, Hannibal noticed that, strangely, Marcellus lacked the initiative he so regularly showed in previous encounters.
Waiting.
Sensing that something was wrong, the Carthaginian general ordered his men to pull back.
Wow.
His intuition was correct.
Hannibal is the most impressive military leader I've ever learned about. And it's because of stuff like this where it just seems like he's always in full control and knows what he's doing. It's fascinating.
Marcellus had sent Claudius Nero with an elite cavalry detachment to flank the Carthaginian army and strike at their rear once the battle commenced. However, to avoid detection by Hannibal's scouts, Claudius Nero took the longer route and got lost, failing to reach the battlefield in time. By noon, the Carthaginian general arrayed his men at a distance.
Wow, so even if he didn't follow his gut, it might have been okay because they got lost. But I mean, you can't count on that. It was still the good move.
The Carthaginian general arrayed his men at a distance and challenged Marcellus to attack. But the Roman line still did not move. Clearly,
he's definitely like, where the hell are those guys?
Marcellus was up to something, Hannibal thought. Once again displaying his uncanny ability to sense danger, he turned his army and made way for Tarentum. Marcellus, although unable to defeat Hannibal, had matched him on the battlefield for a third time, something no other Roman general was able to do at this stage of the war.
Did he really match him? It seems like his bluffs kept getting called.
At Nola, Marcellus truly lived up to the reputation he gained about a decade earlier when he speared the Gallic king Viridomarus. He then stripped the armor off his opponent and claimed it as spolia opima, translated from Latin as rich spoils. This highest of Roman honors could only be attained by generals who personally killed the opposing commander in single combat. For some perspective, only 3 Romans in history achieved this feat. The mythical king Romulus in 752 BC, Aulus Cornelius Cossus in 437 BC, and Marcus Claudius Marcellus in 222 BC. It was an incredibly rare achievement. At Nola, some hours later, Claudius Nero finally found his way to the battlefield. But by the time he appeared from the nearby hills, the Carthaginian column had gone.
Yeah, a bit late. It's, I always use the same words, like it's so cool, it's awesome, it's fascinating, but maybe I need to expand my vocabulary, but those words work. So I'm going to say again, it's fascinating. But what's fascinating is how much military honors. Like, of course, today countries have things like, you know, the Medal of Honor, the Victorious Cross, and a lot of countries honor their military. But it seems like back in these times, so much of society was focused on warfare, whereas I'm sure they had, you know, some games and stuff and family life you need to worry about. But it seems like warfare was the main place where you got accolades that society cared about, you know? Not to say that doesn't exist today, but it seemed much more consuming in the past, of just war was just a natural everyday thing of life. And I would think that having that honor of that Marcellus had and the two before him, Romulus, maybe more mythical or whatever, but to have that piece of armor and to give it that name, where that must have been such a big deal. I can't think. It must have been like winning MVP in football on steroids, like times a million, of just like, yeah, I have this. I actually killed the leader of my opponent in battle, and I'm sure that was just such a flex, beyond anything I'd imagine a military flex would be considered today, you know?
Pressing on towards Tarentum, Hannibal couldn't help but notice that Hanno failed to appear with his army. But somewhere near Benevento, the Carthaginians came across a field littered with thousands of bodies of their brothers in arms, rotting in the sun. These were Hanno's men. On his way north from Brutium to meet Hannibal near Capua, Hanno was intercepted by Gracchus. The ensuing battle was a gruesome slogging match. The Numidians were superior on the flanks, but in the center, Hanno's Brutians and Lucanians were checked by Gracchus's infantry, comprised of slaves hastily trained and incorporated into the army due to lack of manpower after the defeat at Cannae. In a brilliant move, Gracchus promised every slave freedom if they were victorious. This resulted in an almost fanatical surge of morale, and the slave legions eventually broke Hanno's center. Of the 18,200 men in the Carthaginian army, only 2,000 escaped the slaughter, including Hanno.
When it comes to slavery, my mind goes to, when I think about slaves and slavery, my mind goes to like American slavery, like chattel slavery. You are African descent, you are below us. If you're white, you know, you're below us. And I'd imagine, you know, even if you got your freedom in the United States during the times of slavery, like you went to the north, or somehow you got your freedom in the south and it stayed that way, you would still be black, and so stigmatized and not seen as equal amongst the others in society, especially the white people in society. But I wonder how it was for slaves being freed as Roman slaves, right? So a lot of the slaves, I believe, were taken from when you were victorious in battle, and either the soldiers or people from a village you conquered. But I wonder, they probably looked much more alike to Romans, and so if you got your freedom as a slave, like after this battle you fought and won, would there still be any stigma? Would there be the opposite of stigma, seeing like a respect that you won it in battle to receive your freedom? And I wonder how a freed slave, especially one that gained freedom in fighting for Rome in a battle and they won, how would they be seen? Would they still have a stigma? You know what I'm trying to say?
Most tragically, 1,200 irreplaceable Numidian horsemen were lost. Although Hanno survived, his defeat at Benevento left Hannibal with no more than 45,000 troops in Italy. Worse, back in Campania, Marcellus led a daring action in besieging and ultimately capturing Casilinum, a town that served as a key crossing on the Volturnus River that controlled direct access to Capua from the north.
Man, that guy really screwed Hannibal over by calling him back to Capua, losing all this territory here. What a screw up.
A rider was sent to notify Hannibal that Casilinum was lost, but it is unknown if the messenger ever reached him. During the late summer of 214 BC, the Carthaginian general continued through the Apennine Mountains, destroying Roman possessions as he went. Meanwhile, across the sea to the east, Philip attacked Roman Illyria.
Man, going back then, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but being called back from doing what you were doing over here and going to around Capua where there wasn't an issue, and then you ended up having a false battle where you didn't even end up fighting, and then going back and seeing the stuff you lost here, and then now there is trouble near Capua. That would have been so frustrating.
Simultaneous actions of the two commanders pose an interesting question. Did Hannibal and Philip coordinate their plans?
So is this Philip II's great-grandson? Or Alexander the Great's great-grandson?
We may never know, but Hannibal and Philip coordinate their plans. We may never know, but a few things suggest they did. As Hannibal advanced towards the Salento Peninsula, Philip's invasion with 120 ships forced the Romans to transfer much of their own fleet from Tarentum to Brundisium. One legion then sailed to Illyria to check the Macedon advance under the command of Valerius himself. If Hannibal could take Tarentum with its valuable port, and Philip managed to overrun Illyria, Carthage and Macedon could link up. Moreover, Tarentum could become his new headquarters. Thus, Valerius's forces were pinned down in the Salento Peninsula and Illyria, split in two on either side of the sea. And although Philip's war effort would falter unexpectedly quickly, for now it seemed to Rome that another front had opened in Illyria. Meanwhile, Fabius used Hannibal's absence to lay waste to Samnite lands loyal to Carthage. The operation was exceptionally brutal. Some 25,000 were captured and summarily executed. To the south, Gracchus launched a raiding mission.
Imagine executing 25,000 people, I'm assuming by the sword. And so it's not like it's firing squad where that's brutal enough. Man, killing 25,000 people back then would have, I feel like, looked extra horrific. Not to say, again, killing 25,000 people in any circumstance is horrific.
To Lucania. Seeking to capitalize on his victory at Beneventum, he dispersed his forces to cover a wider area. But Hanno had by now recruited several thousand troops and moved against Gracchus upon learning from his scouts that his army was divided. Despite no longer having the swift Numidians in his ranks, with the help of the locals loyal to Carthage, Hanno was able to find and destroy the Romans piecemeal before they had time to react or regroup.
How do you have sufficient groups as the Carthaginian sided, people? You fought in these areas simultaneously with good command? That seems so strange for the time.
He inflicted on Gracchus the same losses he previously suffered at Beneventum. But more importantly, he repelled the attack on Brutium and Lucania and gained more time to rebuild his army. By early autumn 214 BC, as Hannibal entered Tarentine territory, all plundering stopped. Foragers and raiders stayed with the column as he wanted to win sympathies of the Tarentines. But once he reached the city, to his surprise, no one was there to welcome him. Somehow the Romans found out about the Tarentine conspiracy and took drastic measures. A 5,000-strong Roman garrison was stationed in Tarentum on high alert, commanded by Marcus Livius Macatus. Another garrison was placed in nearby Beneventum, ready to intervene. More of Valerius's troops were stripped from the Illyrian expedition and placed in Venusia and Brundisium, ready to march to Tarentum's defense at a moment's notice. The increased Roman presence discouraged the cities of the Salento Peninsula from defecting. As an added measure, Macatus took hostages from the families of Tarentine aristocrats and sent them to Rome, ensuring the gates of Tarentum would remain closed. Hannibal did not linger. He left the lands of Tarentum intact, as he did not want to abandon plans to win the city over to his side.
Hey, that'd be a good strategy to keep a population that you are afraid could defect to Hannibal or to the other side. Even if you don't really have forces, just lie and let the locals know there are like 3 big Roman armies very nearby. Even if it's not true, just to make it a harder choice for people to defect, you know?
Marching southwest along the coast, he plundered the towns and countryside around Beneventum, advancing as far as Heraclea unchallenged, before turning north towards Apulia. Burning and pillaging as he went, his aim was to demonstrate Rome's inability or unwillingness to protect its Italiate Greek allies. This was a strong message to his supporters in Tarentum. Descending from the Apennine slopes into the grazing lands below, the Carthaginians confiscated 4,000 horses and drove off thousands more to prevent the Romans from using them.
Yeah, I feel like this strategy, you have to walk a fine line as Hannibal is doing this, because you want to show the people of Tarentum, around Tarentum, that like, hey, look at how incapable Rome is, but you also don't want to cause too many bad things that they then see you as the worst guy.
Finally, by late autumn,
if anything I'm saying is nonsense to you guys, call me out in the comments, please, as always.
Hannibal reached Salapia, where he set up his winter quarters, a suitable location chosen for its expansive foraging grounds. Across the sea in Iberia, victories of the Scipio brothers convinced most tribes of the Ebro Valley to ally themselves with Rome. But the tribes south of the Ebro were still hesitant. And the arrival of Mago Barca with a fresh army to reinforce his brother Hasdrubal, as well as a third army led by Hasdrubal Gisgo, cemented Carthage's dominance in Iberia. That said, after the catastrophic defeat at Iberia in 215 BC, the priority of the Carthaginian Senate in 214 was not conquest, but stabilization of Iberia. Though they possessed a much larger army than the Scipio brothers, they had to utilize these troops to both fight the Romans and control the vast tribal territories under their rule, from whom they extracted taxes, resources, and troops. So the Carthaginians opted to freeze the conflict and continue building up their forces until they were ready to drive out the Romans from Iberia.
Probably smart.
The Scipio brothers, in their base at Taraco, could only hope to defend the territory under their control. And thus the war in Iberia turned into a stalemate, a situation that would continue for over 2 years. Back in Campania, Rome...
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a really smart move on Barca and the Barcas, you know, just Carthage, in that rather than cause a fight where you might lose and then have all of these areas not fully under your control, they could just sweep through. And by staying and fortifying, you can build up your troop levels for a potential engagement and also solidify control so that even if you lose the initial engagement, you can still fall back without complete collapse.
For over 2 years. And thus the war in Iberia turned into a stalemate, a situation that would continue for over 2 years. Back in Campania, Rome did not press its advantage after capturing Casilinum. Consuls Fabius and Marcellus were far more concerned with the troubling developments in Syracuse. It was decided that Marcellus would depart for Sicily at once. His proactive stance against the Carthaginians prevented the fall of several key Roman positions in Campania and had weakened Hannibal's hold on the region. It was
one of the things I find interesting about these videos on the Punic Wars is that I see I mean, we did just see some in Spain, right? Carthaginian generals or leaders. But I feel like I miss out on a lot of Carthaginian figures in these areas.
Hoped that he could repeat the same feat and reverse the setbacks Rome suffered in Sicily. But once he disembarked, Marcellus found that the situation on the island was in disarray. The alliance between Rome and Syracuse, which had lasted for 50 years, had all but crumbled.
I listened to that.
Hannibal's agents, Hippocrates and Epicides, with their roots in Syracuse, had cemented the alliance between Carthage and Syracuse. Roman praetor Appius Claudius made a last-ditch effort to bring Syracuse back into the fold, sending envoys to King Hieronymus's court. The diplomats declared to the king that they had come to renew the alliance which had existed with his grandfather, Hero II. But Hieronymus and his courtiers laughed at the Romans. Smirkingly, Hieronymus rhetorically asked them if the stories of the disaster at Cannae were true. He quipped that he wanted to hear the truth from the Romans themselves before deciding who to side with. Clearly, it was his understanding that the Romans were losing the war. But
are they going to lie?
From his condescending tone, it was obvious that the young king had already made up his mind.
Okay.
The Roman envoys remained calm, saying they would return once Hieronymus learned to receive embassies seriously. But
so it seems like he already knew what happened at Cannae, and just wanted to, like, troll them.
Before leaving, they warned him, rather than asked him, not to abandon their alliance so lightly. Hieronymus promptly departed the capital with his entourage and headed for Leontini, where he enjoyed strong support.
You gotta have some balls to say that so far into territory of someone obviously mocking you. I'm sure, yeah, they had some rules about not harming envoys, but still, it's like threatening someone in their territory who is clearly not on your side is a ballsy move.
And would be safe from his enemies in Syracuse. But the pro-Roman faction had had enough of the young monarch. While en route to Leontini, the king was assassinated.
Wow.
However, in an unusual twist, instead of the throne going to a pro-Roman candidate, Hannibal's allies, Hippocrates and Epicides, were elected magistrates on the Syracusan ruling council. They immediately set up their base in Leontini. With 4,000 troops under their command, they began to raid Roman towns and countryside. Still, Appius Claudius managed to recover most of the territory held by the Greek rebels, with only the northeastern corner of Sicily remaining hostile to Rome. Marcellus conducted the second attack. In August, he stormed and took Leontini. 2,000 Carthaginian sympathizers were lined up in the streets, beaten and killed, while Hippocrates and Epicides retreated with the remnants of their army to Herbesos. There they convinced the city's commander to bring 8,000 troops to the city of Syracuse.
A lot of, killings in this time seems so normal for what would be considered huge war crimes today. Undoubtedly, they still happen around the world today, but it seems like it's just kind of par for the course back then.
To help
it's like, yeah, we killed all of them. We executed them. Well, obviously.
The Romans. Marcellus, meanwhile, took 1/3 of the army and moved into Sicily's interior. His plan was to reduce Syracusan strongholds of Haena, Herbesos, and the fortified coastal cities of Megara and Helorus, as well as to finally deal with the Greek rebel cities in the mountainous northeast that tied up significant Roman resources in the area. Knowing that this operation would take months to complete, he tasked Appius Claudius with preparing the remaining 2/3 of the army for the siege of the city of Syracuse. By the end of 214 BC, it was clear that the Hannibalic hegemony in Italy had weakened. After years of trying, Hanno was unsuccessful in capturing Reggio, an important city that controlled the Straits of Messina. Rome captured the strategically important town of Casilinum, and now Capua was on the defensive. The Romans also recovered towns in Samnium, Lucania, and northern Apulia.
Not looking good.
Worse, without reinforcements, funds, and supplies promised to him by Carthage, Hannibal was by now
and the failed expansion of the Greeks into this Roman territory. This has been not even fully or much from Hannibal's fault, but just a lot of unfortunate mistakes.
Obviously struggling to maintain control over his territory in southern Italy. He was losing momentum, and he needed new battlefield victories that would persuade fresh defections from Rome. To achieve this, he set his sights on Tarentum. At the start of 213 BC, Rome elected Fabius Maximus's son, Quintus Fabius, and Sempronius Gracchus as consuls. Hannibal's own war effort this year would reach a new intensity as he probed for new vulnerabilities of his enemy. In March, he moved into the lands of the Salentini, the so-called heel of Italy, which offered rich foraging grounds.
I wonder if for the Romans, since you quelched the invasion of the Greeks into this territory, and that made it now much less likely for the Greeks to come to the Carthaginians' aid, I wonder if just sort of letting Hannibal march through this area, maybe even capturing Tarentum, might be a worthy trade-off for just, okay, now he's all the way over here, we're doing well in Sicily, and just maybe just going and crushing Capua instead of going for Hannibal.
The presence of his army there encouraged Philip to continue his own war efforts in Illyria. This forced the Romans to send more troops from the Salento to Greece, which allowed dissent to grow among the Tarentine, Messapian, and Lapygian communities. The ultimate objective of Hannibal's operation in the Salento was the capture of Tarentum, but for much of 213 BC, he focused his efforts on rallying local support, understanding that to achieve his goal, he must first weaken Rome's authority in the region. Fortunately for Hannibal, the Messapian aristocracy suffered economic decline under Roman rule, especially since the start of the war, and many were by now eager to throw off the Roman yoke. By early summer, several cities defected to Hannibal, among which were Uzentum, a strategic hub in the heel of Italy, and Mandoria, just east of Tarentum, which could serve as a base of operations. Other important centers also joined him, such as Naratum and Hydruntum, as well as Lupiae, the second most populous city in the Salento Peninsula. Hannibal would spend the spring and summer seasons forming a buffer zone between Tarentum and the Roman base at Brundisium. He knew that as his presence increased in the Salento, the Tarentine nobility would eventually advance their own clandestine anti-Roman plans. But perhaps more importantly, Hannibal welcomed the much-needed new recruits from the region into his army. However, to the north in Apulia, Rome continued with the strategy of attacking Hannibal's allies during his absence. Consul Quintus Fabius besieged and stormed Arpi, the epicenter of support for Hannibal in Apulia. Heavy fighting in the narrow streets during a rainy night convinced the consul to offer terms to avoid massive casualties for his own army. Fabius agreed to allow the 5,000-strong Carthaginian garrison to leave unharmed in exchange for giving up the city. While the loss of Arpi was a setback for Hannibal, his hold over Apulia was evident to the Romans.
Again, probably a pretty smart trade. Let the 2,000 Carthaginians go so that you can swiftly start taking Carthaginian-held strongholds. Smart.
Just like Arpi, the other Apulian cities were garrisoned, well provisioned, and were now on high alert. Dislodging the Carthaginians was far from being a foregone conclusion. Some good news for Hannibal came from Brutium, where Hanno the Elder defeated a pro-Roman Lucanian army and advanced into Lucania to recover several cities. This victory did much to boost confidence among the Greek cities of southern Italy that Carthage would win the war. But while Hannibal and Hanno renewed the offensive, in Sicily the pro-Carthaginian faction was on the defensive. By April 213 BC, the contest on the island reached a crescendo. Marcellus had brought much of the island under Roman control and had commenced the siege of the city of Syracuse, the last major pro-Carthaginian holdout in Sicily. In July, across the sea in Africa, for the first time since the start of the war, trouble was brewing in Carthage's own backyard. Numidia, a vast Berber region, was divided into two kingdoms in the 3rd century BC. The Massili were a Berber federation in eastern Numidia, formed by an amalgamation of smaller tribes ruled over by King Gaia.
I wonder what these, heavily Muslim areas today, but of course, Islam isn't even created for another, 800 years, give or take. Few years, but I wonder what the religious traditions were like for the Nubians, or before all that.
Their relationship with Carthage resembled that of a protectorate. The powerful empire dominated Massili politics through skillful diplomatic maneuvering, marriages, economic dependency, and playing off local tribes and kingdom rivalries. As such, the Massili fully committed to fighting alongside Carthage by sending both regular troops and mercenaries, their strong and proficient cavalry force being a crucial component of Carthaginian armies. In western Numidia were the powerful Massazili. They were an extremely rich Berber kingdom that could support a large army, and just like their eastern neighbors, they possessed a strong cavalry. As such, their king Syphax always harbored ambitions to rule a fully independent kingdom. To this end, at the start of the Second Punic War, he was sympathetic to the Romans, but he had to refrain from joining their side in the war, because in 218 BC, Carthage was a vast, wealthy superpower. It dominated North African politics and held strong influence within Syphax's kingdom, including a prominent pro-Carthaginian faction and close economic ties that benefited most of the Massazili nobility, who would oppose siding with Rome. But while Syphax could not openly be hostile to Carthage, he showed defiance by remaining largely neutral and refused to send regular troops to fight for Carthage. However, many thousands of Numidian mercenaries from his kingdom did serve in Carthaginian armies in both Iberia and Italy, though their services did not come cheap. But now, in 213 BC, messages coming from Rome claimed that the tide of the war was turning. Persuaded, Syphax swayed sections of the Masaesyli nobility and decided it was time to go to war with Carthage. The Scipio brothers sent Quintus Statorius, a centurion from Iberia, to help train Syphax's infantry in the Roman way of war, as well as the art of fortification. To counter the threat, King Gaius's son, Prince Massinissa, was put in charge of 30,000 troops to confront the threat. The two armies met west of Sirte, where Massinissa completely routed Syphax and his Roman-trained army. The Masaesylian king fled west towards the lands of the Mauri, where he would spend several months building a new army. Despite this victory, the Carthaginians knew that Syphax was a serious threat that had to be neutralized.
Yeah, I'm sure this would be very easy to neutralize them, though I'm not sure they would start the rebellion in the first place if it was the case. But if, you know, either Hannibal wasn't dealing with stuff in Italy, or the other Barcas and the guys in Spain, modern day Spain, didn't have to worry about incursions here and then lose Iberia, then I'm sure that, you know, they'd be crushed pretty quickly.
Fortunately for Carthage, by the autumn of 213, the situation in Iberia had stabilized, and the Senate could afford to recall Hasdrubal Barca, ordering him to prepare to cross with his army into western Numidia. Back at Tarentum, news reached the city that some...
I'd imagine you would want to do that quickly and as secretly as possible so that you can go and crush them before the Roman forces in Iberia catch word and maybe want to have an incursion.
Of the noble hostages held by Rome attempted to escape, but were caught and executed. This provoked outrage among Tarentine aristocrats, further strengthening the support for Hannibal. By executing the hostages, Rome lost much of the leverage they had over the anti-Roman Tarentine aristocracy.
Good point.
A coup de main was not long in coming, led by young aristocrats Philemenus and Nico.
What's the difference between coup d'etat and coup de main?
Throughout the winter, they gathered more supporters within the city, and once the snow melted, they put their plan into action.
Snow in southern Italy? Maybe it's mountainous?
Under the guise of going on a lavish hunting expedition, the conspirators rode to Hannibal's winter camp, just 3 days' march from Tarentum. Hannibal's terms were too good to pass up. Tarentum's freedom was guaranteed. No tribute would be extracted by Carthage. The city was free to appoint their own magistrates, who would rule under Tarentine laws. They did not have to accept a Punic garrison within the walls, unless they chose to do so. Roman property and citizens, however, were to be seized by Hannibal and used for ransom or sold into slavery. Philemenus and Nico readily accepted. They stood up, went to where Hannibal have to accept a Punic garrison within the walls, unless they chose to do so. Roman property and citizens, however, were to be seized by Hannibal and used for ransom or sold into slavery.
The entire Roman population of Tarentum would be hostages?
Philemenus and Nico readily accepted. They stood up, went to where Hannibal was seated, and whispered in his ear their plan for the betrayal of Rome. The next day, Hannibal released a small portion of cattle from his baggage train. The conspirators then brought these back to Tarentum, claiming to have found them roaming free and had captured them. They repeated this ruse several times in the weeks following. Philemenus preferred hunting at night, supposedly to avoid frequent Punic patrols. He would always return with plenty to show for, and was eager to share the spoils with the guards and commander at the side gate he used. The Romans had gotten so used to the routine that whenever they heard Philemenus' whistle during the night, they would let him in without checking.
I had it. So that was a double whammy strategy of, you know, showing goodwill and giving people food, and also just showing him as a routine he did to have their guard down when he comes in for the real reason.
Eager to get their hands on the prize. Then, during one night in early March, Hannibal led his fastest 8,000 cavalry and 2,000 Gallic and Libyan infantry out of the camp.
Is he going to come back in and then hold the doors?
80 Numidian riders screened far ahead of the column, with orders to capture or kill anyone they encounter. But otherwise, they were to give off the impression that they were a regular foraging party. 3 days later, Hannibal stopped the column in a gorge not far from the city, hidden from view. Here he rested the men for a day and briefed his officers on his plan. The following night, the attack began.
I love this channel so much.
In complete silence, Hannibal led 6,000 horse and 1,000 foot towards the Temenid Gate, accompanied by Nico and a group of conspirators. The troops were ordered to stay compact and obey Hannibal's every order. To the south of Hannibal, Philemenus led a group of 1,000 Libyan infantry toward...
Oh, I thought he was going to have a bunch of cows again, and then open the gate, and then just keep it open for Hannibal to rush in.
The side gate he regularly used for his hunting expeditions. 2,000 cavalry were left as a rear guard to cover the escape or reinforce the attack.
Wait, those aren't cattle?
The Tarentine conspirators deliberately chose this night because a pre-arranged feast in the city was in full swing, and Livius, the commander of the Roman garrison, was in attendance. Through hours of song and laughter, they kept him drinking until he had to be carried home. By the time the music died down, the gates were breached. Hearing Philemenus' whistle coming from the darkness, the guards allowed him through the side entrance. While they inspected their prize, 30 Libyans rushed in.
Oh, he's back. He's got the cattle. Wait, that's not cattle. I just made that joke. I'm sorry.
Quickly overwhelming the few sentries, they proceeded to open the gate for the rest of the infantry. Meanwhile, with the help of the conspirators, Hannibal breached the main gate, surprising most of the guards in their sleep, and rushed through the streets towards the Forum, where he was supposed to meet Philemenus and the Libyan infantry. Disorganized Roman troops rushed into the streets, but were quickly overrun.
Many of them drunk, maybe?
Livius and his officers escaped towards the citadel at the last minute. Adding to the confusion, conspirators waiting at pre-designated locations around the city blew Roman military trumpets, sounding off a mix of different orders. This had the effect of sending in Roman troops piecemeal into the meat grinder.
I imagine like that commander who was in attendance at that feast or whatever and got too drunk and had to be dragged away. I imagine him like over a toilet, like being super drunk and like puking, and then someone being like, hey, the Romans are in the city. Like, bleh.
However, a good portion of the garrison managed to retreat across the narrow promontory to the citadel before Hannibal could reach it. Livius sent an urgent message via boat to the nearby Metapontum. By early morning, Hannibal ordered the building of a wall to cut off the citadel from the rest of the city. The citadel controlled the only entrance into the Tarentum harbor, and for now the men inside could receive supplies by sea. The entire garrison of Beneventum arrived several days later. Hannibal made several attempts to storm the citadel. Meanwhile, to prevent a further influx of Roman supplies and manpower, he organized the transport of Tarentine ships from the harbor overland, dragging the galleys through the streets and into the sea, from where they could blockade the citadel.
I was going to mention that, I swear, that are they going to utilize the boats somehow?
The direct assaults failed, and once the wall was complete, Hannibal left the Tarentines in charge of the blockade. The capture of Tarentum was a bitter blow for the Romans, and a great yet incomplete victory for Hannibal. The large Roman garrison was determined to withstand the siege at all costs, often enduring near-famine conditions. This meant that the power of Tarentum could not be fully utilized for Hannibal's war effort, as resources needed to be allocated towards blockading the defenders from receiving supplies and reinforcements by sea. Nevertheless, by taking Tarentum, Hannibal caused a domino effect. More Messapian communities joined him, and much of the Salento Peninsula was now under his control. Metapontum and Heraclea also defected. Even in Brundisium, rumors circulated that the Messapian aristocracy within the city were ready to betray Rome. By April 213 BC, Hannibal's territory in southern Italy reached its greatest extent. But the Carthaginian army would not be resting for long. A rider bearing grim news entered Tarentum.
Yeah, what have the Romans been doing up north this whole time?
And demanded to see Hannibal in person. Out of breath, the messenger dismounted, and as he ran in to be received by Hannibal, he fell to the ground, his hand extending a note. It was from Capua. The message read, "We are besieged by 4 legions. Come at once."
Boy who cried wolf, but I'm sure it is serious this time. Hannibal, I'm thinking, like, last time I was told that I lost a bunch of territory and they didn't need it. But the Romans are doing exactly what I thought they should do, in that worry less about Tarentum and you know, the heel of the boot of Italy, that, you know, more southwest eastern peninsula, and then just like take more stuff up north.
If you like what you see, consider supporting my work on Patreon, and you get ad-free early access to my videos for as little as $1. You can also show your support by liking the video, commenting, and subscribing to my channel as a sacrifice to the algorithm. As always, I'll see you in the next one.
So one thing that I would love, I always say how instant communication is the most revolutionary invention maybe of all time. Like, more than gunpowder, more than the wheel. Well, maybe but instant communication, maybe I'm exaggerating, but instant communication changed everything from economics, world economics, trade routes, but warfare especially. And I would love to know, I'm sure, the sophisticated system they had of communication. You know? I had one more question that I kind of forget what I was gonna say. Ooh, I wonder what is gonna happen in Sicily. That seems to be what will... Do you go and try and rescue Capua? Do you go and try and cross that strait to Sicily and secure that? I'm assuming the former. So, love you all. Hope you're all doing well. Would appreciate any comments down below. Answers to any of my questions. You guys are always awesome with that. Love you guys in the comments. If I said anything you disagree with or was wrong or stupid, call me out. I would love nothing more. It helps me out too. So, Love y'all. Hope everyone's doing well. See you next time, guys. We'll keep on learning. Bye.